detention centers now, please!
I agree with you. I'm working on them, man. Give me another 5 days.
All right, so it's another 3 days from now. We'll see what happens on that. But again, one of those rare events where the president was cornered by protesters on what's happening at the border, a crisis that he does not define as a crisis, but he promises to address within a matter of days. We shall see. Ron Vitiello joins us right now, the retired acting ICE director. Ron, what did you think of that?
Well, it's just a situation that we're in publicly. There's this crisis on the border, and you have a certain segment of the population, those protesters, that want to remove the resources that the Department of Homeland Security needs to help solve this problem. And so, shutting down detention is not going to make the problems at the border better. It's not going to protect the homeland. Those are necessary resources. That's why they're in inventory. And to suggest that we could do without them or that we're going to end them, it makes no sense to me at all.
We're learning a little bit more about the cut in funding for the border wall that the Biden administration had included in its skinny budget. In other words, that's not included in that skinny budget, but that he had specifically canceled all border wall projects that were paid for with diverted military funds, that was a rationale for doing so. What did you make of that?
Well, that's less resources, that's less capability on the border. I would urge this administration to help the men and women of CBP, specifically the Border Patrol, as it relates to the wall. There are known gaps in the construction projects that exist right now, and I would urge them to close those gaps. When I was a chief in Rio Grande Valley, we had put up the wall and we intended to put gates in certain areas, and the funding and the resources and the lawsuits prevented us from closing those gaps. And that's manpower intensive. You have to have somebody guarding those gaps 24/7 because that's a natural entry point for folks. And so I would urge them to shore up the gaps where the 18-foot barrier has, if you have 18-foot barrier on the right and the left, you got to close up that gap. Otherwise, you're going to be wasting valuable agent time to just sit and watch that opening in the wall.
Ron, how important is it to you, as someone who was a former Border Patrol chief, to see the president or the vice president, for that matter, at the border, to go and visit these facilities?
Well, it means a great deal to the workforce. Even at my level, when we went out and visited with the men and women who are on the front line and asked them what their needs were, asked them what their challenges were, and then I could take that back to Washington and work with my staff to try to meet those needs. And then there's this whole morale boost that comes with it. You have somebody, in authority in the government that's in your chain of command, including the president, that knows what you do and is eager to understand it and then provide resources and provide information and get his staff to plan to shore up these gaps to help, ameliorate this crisis. I think it would be very valuable for them to do.
There's not much we know about the human trafficking part of this outside of this development this past week where 90 people were found in a Houston home, looked like any home in any idyllic neighborhood in this country. 90 people were crowded in there. What did you make of it, and the fact that maybe what's been happening at the border is what triggered it?
Well, that's a symptom. This is a symptom of what happens when the border is in chaos, right? These 90 people were smuggled into the Houston area. Imagine if you lived on that street. Imagine your kids riding their bikes back and forth along that block, how dangerous that is for neighborhoods. And then those people, 90 people in a small family home, probably being extorted, probably being human trafficked. And if you've got 90 people who have just crossed the border illegally, there's at least a handful of them that have criminal records. And so it's an unsafe and unsanitary condition for those individual migrants to be in, but it's also a danger to that community. And it's an example of what happens when we don't have sufficient resources and control at the border.
All right. Now, I do know the administration will tap the Agriculture Department to provide personnel to help. I don't know specifically if it's going to be at the border, Ron. We just hear up to 500 individuals. I'm not sure those who work at the Agriculture Department ever signed up for that, but what do you make of it?
Yeah, this was done before in the 2014 surge as well. You're looking for government employees because they're cleared and they have known backgrounds so that they can interact and help alleviate some of the shelters or the Border Patrol spaces, right? So they can do things that help care and comfort for these migrants that are in custody. rolling back this policy and not having sufficient resources at the border is going to go down as a mistake. To say that it's getting better, okay, fine. They've moved more migrants out of Border Patrol custody last month and into HHS care, but not having sufficient shelter space and reversing the policy and knowing that that was going to be the result is just a big mistake. And unfortunately, it's the men and women of CBP and their families that have to go through this stress. And they're the ones that are at the front line that see the bulk of this problem. They can't say no to this traffic. When an unaccompanied minor comes up to an immigration officer, whether a CBPO or a Border Patrol agent, they have to take them into custody. That's the law. There's no option there. If there's no space at HHS, then it just continues to back up. And they've done better, but it's nowhere near to where it needs to be.